All right, everyone, welcome back to Work-Life Harmony. I have one of my favorite guest experts on here today in the new year, Rachel Bailey. Rachel, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we were trying to figure out at the end of 2021, like the timing to get you on, but we both were holidays craziness. So I'm like, let's start the year off with a fresh start. For any of you who are newer to the Work-Life Harmony podcast, and maybe you have not caught a previous episode with Rachel, Rachel is, I like to think of her as my personal parenting therapist, coach, counselor. I'll let her kind of tell you a little bit more about her practice. But I have learned a ton from everything that she teaches. And today I'm really excited to, again, for my own selfish reasons, have a conversation with Rachel about how to navigate when do we really want to pivot on our plans when you have a child with large emotions that is hoping you will pivot your plans versus when you don't and what that looks like. So Rachel, why don't you go ahead, kick things off, tell everyone about yourself, and then we'll get going.
Excellent. So I am a parenting specialist is what I call myself because I'm sort of like a coach, but I do more consulting than coaching per se. My background is in clinical psychology and I've been in the field for about 17, 18 years now. I actually started my career working with kids and with teens. But what happened was, as I was working with kids and teens, and actually it was in a number of ways, I was a therapist, but I was also an ADHD coach. I was an in-home mentor going in and sort of handling all the big emotions and reactions in homes. But what happened was after I worked with kids and teens for about probably 5 or 6 years, I realized that parents needed support as much as, if not more than the kids. And that when I worked with parents, not as a therapist even, but as someone who was giving practical tips, when I worked with parents directly, I had just so much more of an impact, not only on the kid and the teen, but on the entire family. So I've been working with parents directly, again, to give those practical tools. My goal is to really increase peace and flexibility and connection at home. And recently I love the word pivot, because I have pivoted my business to specifically focus on families who have at least one child with big emotions.
And so for those of you that have learned a little bit about my daughter, this is why I was very excited to have Rachel back on. I definitely am a parent of a child with big emotions. She feels all the feels at about 100x, I think, both physically and emotionally. And the timing of our conversation here today is really, really timely because today I am personally living in the exact place that we're going to talk about, which is when you're having that, I coach and teach a lot around how do we pad a little bit of our calendar if we know we are in a life of a lot of uncertainty where things are constantly popping up. And I am in that space right now, but there's that kind of tactical part. But then there's the emotional part, which is not at all my zone of genius. So just this morning, we went through this where my daughter was, quote, not feeling well, which for me is always hard to navigate. Is this real? There are those days where it's real, right? I mean, your kid's barfing or whatever. You're like, okay, good. Like this is legit versus one of these today. Is it real? Is it not? Is there a mental health need day? Like, I don't know. But with this current state of COVID and everything, we have to just err on the Uber side of safety. So she is home today. And I am riddled with I know this is not an emergency situation. If it is, I clear my calendar, I go into pivot mode and I don't blink an eye, but this isn't one of those. So I even said to her this morning, this is not an emergency situation. I need to respect my calendar, but I feel guilty as all get out. And I do, even right now, sitting here talking to you, one of my most favorite people. And so I would love to get your tips, suggestions on kind of navigating when we have to change our plans to accommodate these big emotions and how we feel okay about it, how we can better read into the moment, kind of all the stuff around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when it comes to not only making these decisions, but then feeling good about our decisions, we have the logical piece, which I'll talk about, like what do kids actually need? And then we have the piece that we have to worry about ourselves. Like our guilt often is self-imposed. And we have to, even when we know logically that she's going to be fine, we bring it on ourselves.
Yep.
So let's start with, what do kids actually need? And really, one of the reasons I think you and I get along so well is because I talk about balance just as much as you do. And when you are raising or at least, being able to manage both pieces, it's not always an equal balance, that's for sure. But
Harmony. Yeah. Having that harmony. Yeah.
the harmony, exactly. So what we want to think about when we're raising really any child, it's not even just kids with big emotions, is that there is sort of a continuum where we are giving kids everything they want on one side, and we are being very cold and uncaring on the other. So, if a child says, I don't want to go to school today, or I can't go to school, it's more probably, if I don't want to, we know how to respond to that, but I can't go to school. On one hand, we have the, I don't care, you have to go to school. Again, that's the cold, I don't really care. On the other hand, it's, oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry, you should definitely stay home. We have to find
fluff
that.
your pillows.
Exactly, right. And you can have a little bell that you can ring and I'll be right there. And what kids truly need is a harmony between those two pieces, is a firmness and a respect. It's really about knowing what our boundaries are. And I really say, when we're making decisions like this, should I let her stay home or not? I actually think we need to sort of have values decided ahead of time as much as possible, because in the moment, our emotions take over our values. And so we say, okay, you know what? I'm going to decide ahead of time. I will let my daughter stay home if X, Y, and Z. And you know what your boundaries are. Using your values. When I work with parents, it's exactly how I help them determine boundaries, is what are your values? Because your boundaries are going to look different depending on what your values are. And once you decide what your boundaries are, being firm, but also being really respectful. So today, I think that I commend you, because I think you followed your gut. And I would say your boundary was probably a really good one. She needed to be home. She really did. So you followed your boundary. Let's say another parent on another day would say, you know what, I this time my gut is she needs to go to school. So I want to show you what that middle ground looks like. The firmness is you need to go to school, but it's not you need to go to school and I don't care. It's you need to go to school and I know it's going to be hard. Let's figure out the hardest part of your day and how you can get through it. So I'm being both firm, you have to go to school today because my as a parent, I need to make decisions for you and this is my decision. And I see that it's really tough. So let's show you how. And when you have a big emotion child, the how is extremely important, because genuinely we tell kids, just suck it up or be okay. They don't know how to do that. And then big emotion kids question themselves because they don't know how to do it. And they're like, hey,
I'm
mom,
so
or dad,
guilty
yeah.
of having said that before. I know, like, just tough it out. Just,
Yeah.
and I know that's lousy advice, but sometimes I don't know what else to say.
Right. Because in your defense, you don't necessarily know how to teach her how to tough it out, because either, this is what I find, two sets of parents, and my guess is you're the first. Either we just tough it out ourselves and we know how, so we assume they know how, or we don't know how ourselves, so we don't know how to teach it. So in fact, a lot of what I do with parents is teach them how to do it themselves and how to teach their kids what it looks like to quote unquote tough it out. But I will tell you, big emotion kids do not know how. And then they start to feel bad about themselves because they're like, I should be able to do this. What's wrong with me? Why can't I handle this? There's a lot of questioning inside, which leads to issues with self-esteem.
Yeah. So a couple years ago, I know this is where I always go, like, question myself every morning on these things as well, was was doing gymnastics at the time, had hurt her finger, and we picked her up. It's like, it looked okay. And I'm thinking, oh, it's probably just a jammed finger. And because she feels all the feels, I never know, is this real or are we whatever? So I think a good 3 days go by. And finally, I'm picking her up from school. And even her teacher was like, yeah, her finger's looking kind of bad today. I was like, oh, here we go. So go to the doctor's. Guess what? Broken finger. So then I feel, now I'm like, now I don't trust my instincts anymore from that one thing. But I love the idea of the boundaries aspect of it ahead of time, so that maybe we could even sit down. Have you ever encouraged people to do this as a family, or is this something parents should do without their kids involved?
So both. And in fact, a big part of the program that I have for parents of big emotion children is bringing the family on board, because I think the approach, I call it the connected growth approach. And I think when you have a big emotion child, everybody in the family needs to understand what's going on. Otherwise there's resentment, there's arguing, why did she get this? Why did he get this? Yeah, exactly. And there is a lot of, I honestly, I see this marital discord because parents are not on the same page when it comes to big emotion children. Absolutely. So I do encourage eventually bringing the entire family on board. But it starts with the individual. And I think you being aware of your values. But you also spoke to something really important that we had kind of hinted at already, the guilt, the emotional guilt. So I basically talked about how to decide what to do. You use your values, you balance firmness and respect. But what if you do come across this situation where her finger really was broken and you didn't get it the first time? This is the guilt we feel. And this is what I would say about guilt is that we don't expect our kids to be perfect and be perfect in relationships, yet we expect ourselves to be perfect as parents. So one of the exercises I take all my parents through is, what really truly is your image of being a good mom? Is a good mom actually one who's perfect all the time, who has an instinct that is correct 100% of the time? Is that truly what you believe? Yet that's the standard against which we measure ourselves. And
Yeah.
when you are a parent of a big emotion child, which you are going to set yourself up for failure over and over if that's the measure by which or the standard by which you measure yourself. So again, it's kind of taking a step back and saying, what really should make me feel guilty? And also defining guilt. If I feel guilty about something, what can I do differently the next time? So it's not like guilt means everything is ruined. So when it comes to guilt, again, there are two pieces. Number one, what should I feel guilty about? Like, what do I really think is a good mom? Who do I want to be as a mom?
Yeah.
And then if I do feel guilty, what can I do about it instead of staying stuck in that place of guilt? So I don't know if that helps you think about it a little bit differently.
No, it really does, because even as you're talking, I'm thinking in my mind, okay, I feel like some of today's a little bit of a learning opportunity. If there is a true situation here of, we don't just get fun and games and mom's attention all day when we're really not feeling well, versus, when you're really sick, what that looks like. But it's funny, even when you said that instantly I'm like, no, of course I don't want to set an example that I'm perfect. I mean, nobody is. And that's something I really lean into. Yet here I am still thinking I'm supposed to get it right every single time. And as soon as you say it, it's like, I just felt like this, like 100-pound weight just went off my shoulder. Like, maybe I am getting it wrong today. I don't know. But what I always love that Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. Right.
Right. And I'm a big believer, because I actually am a highly sensitive person. I'm like truly a highly sensitive person, big feeling person myself. I know as a highly sensitive person, I want to be around other people who are also imperfect, because I'm imperfect. Like would want to know my own mom is imperfect, because I feel it when I'm not. And I want to be around someone else who can say, you know what, I didn't make the right call, and I felt bad, and I'm not perfect. And then I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's such a relief to know, that other people are imperfect too, because I sure as heck know I am. For kids, it's comforting for us to be imperfect as well.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting the way I kind of decided to tackle today work-wise. This happens to be the start of a boot camp week, which is live, which is thankfully, I usually clear my calendar on boot camp weeks as much as possible, because I know it's not so much the tactical have to do things, it's just the energy. I'm an introvert. So for me to go all in for a half an hour and do all that I can to deliver, it sucks the life out of me, but in a way I wouldn't have it any other way. So I sat down after we made the decision and yes, there was some strife between myself and my spouse on this decision this morning. So I'm glad you brought that up. I looked at my calendar and said, okay, I have 2 appointments at specific times, and they're both, being here with you, doing the boot camp, non-negotiable to me, because this is not an emergency situation. So I'm holding on to those. Then I looked at the other things I'd put on my calendar for today that were my list of have tos that didn't have a specific time slot today. And so I kind of said, okay, I had planned on really front loading heavy early in the morning, because I work better in the morning, knowing I don't work as well in the afternoon. So I rearranged a couple of the tasks of the order I was going to do it, to be able to save up, like you get 1 movie today, save up I really can't be interrupted time tasks, and time when she's allowed to have a movie during that. And then I swapped some stuff from the morning to this afternoon, and then just sat down with her and said, here's what the day is going to look like. I do have to get these done, but I'm going to take these 3 breaks for about 45 minutes. And that's when you and I will, have some time, but otherwise.
Absolutely. And this is what I really want to emphasize. And this is not just for big emotion children. They need us to set boundaries and say, okay, you're home from school today. I actually can't be with you for most of the day. The key is most of us forget the next step, which is to tell them how to deal with that. They just need to know how to deal with that, we don't, being a good parent from
'Cause
my
that was the
perspective.
first thing. She's like, well, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah,
Like, well,
because a lot of
there's
kids,
a million options.
right. But here's what I will say, and this is not an excuse, but this is such a thing that I think as parents we miss because we're not aware. I know how brains work really, really well. Most parents miss this. When there's a lot of things to do, it's actually overwhelming for children.
Right.
There's
Yeah,
an executive
probabilistically.
functioning skill called, task initiation. It's actually hard for kids to initiate a task. Even if there are 50 things for them to do and they know it, it's hard for them to start.
Well,
So
you taught me that,
yeah,
and that's been a game changer for us. So
yeah.
definitely tell people about that because it's been amazing here.
Yeah. So basically, executive functioning skills are the skills required to act mature and responsible. And the part of the brain where our executive functioning skills live doesn't fully develop until the mid-20s. So
Wow.
kids and teens do not have excellent executive functioning skills. So, which is why, the pandemic was particularly hard because at home learning required so many that they didn't have. We could go into that for
Yes,
a whole
D
other
from
episode.
that.
Right. But so here's the thing, we teach kids how, and this to me, when I'm helping parents of children with big emotions, it's all about resilience. We need to help them be resilient. And that is about balancing this firmness, this boundary with how do you deal with the fact that I'm setting a boundary? I am going to set the boundary and I'm going to respect that you might not know how. So what part of the day might be hard for you? Are you wondering what to do? Should I start it with you and then you finish it? Do you want to read the directions to me and then you get started? So it's really, the guilt comes from, I didn't do everything to make them happy. That's not what we want to be as parents. We want to recognize if I give my kids a firm boundary and the how they need that, then that's enough and they're good. And I need to
And
just work on my own stuff.
I found myself this morning even, and you were in my ear because, she was trying to, I was like, we're not doing electronics all day. So she's like, well, what do I do? And we just gotten this new craft kit. So I'm like, well, why don't you start on the next craft? And I could see her just walking in circles.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remembered what you had taught me during that pandemic of like, start with her until she's fully enveloped. So I went and sat down. It was 2 minutes of my time, got her going on it. And then I walked away and we were good for 45 minutes.
Yes. That task initiation piece, kids
and she knew
adults
how, because
yeah.
we've done it a million times, but just for whatever reason, just having me be there to start it is what works well for her. And that has been you have saved me so many times from that tip. It's been so good.
I'm so glad. But I think we get frustrated because it's like they should be able to do that. But we as adults can relate. How many times do we know we have to get started and we just don't? And it's like a little mountain we have to climb in order to initiate a task. And when we help our kids with that and they get engaged, it's like, it's all done. They're in. And they're going to be, their attention's going to be taken for a while. Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll be honest, my lovely podcast editor, David, is going to have to edit out part of this because as we were chatting, the dog came in, it was noisy, it was loud. And that was the one responsibility for this window was the dog. We had to pause and go handle all of that. And so, I want to tell all the listeners that to know, even when you put all these things in place, things happen, life happens. And I'm not going to beat myself up over it. And I think that acknowledging the imperfectness is good sometimes.
It's huge. And just remember, how would you want your child to feel inside when they want to make a mistake, when they make a mistake? Yeah. That's what you want to model. You'd want to model grace and, just a little bit of flexibility, especially if you have a big emotion child, they need to learn flexibility. We have to give that to ourselves if we want to teach it to our children.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for other listeners with big emotion kids that it's the morning, you are in that moment of debating, is this something where I should push and make them go to school versus they're going to stay home, whether it's a mental health day, because I'm a big believer in that. And we talk about that. I'm like, just be honest. Don't lie to me that you're sick. If you're not, just say I need a mental health day. But any tips on how to best read and understand what might really be going on there that helps us feel good with the decision we've made, whether it's home or school?
Yeah, I think it's hard in the moment to make a great decision, but here's what I would say you want to think about in the moment.
That makes you feel better already.
Yeah, it is, because our brain gets taken over by the concerns, the worry, the future thinking that we're doing. And when we're in that place, I call it a place of yuck, where we're worrying and fearful. We can't access the part of the brain where our good decisions live. But here are some guidelines, I would say. Number one, if a child has the skills to kind of push themselves and do hard things, I would send them to school. If you know they have the skills and it's not a dangerous situation.
Right.
That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is if it's starting to affect their functioning, that's when there's a bigger issue. Like if you notice they're trying to stay home all the time and it's really impacting their ability to learn, then there's probably a red flag there that you want to think about.
Right.
And then I would say every once in a while, though, a mental health day, like you said, is you want to just think about what's been going on for my child. Do they really need a mental health day? Has their yuck really increased tremendously? So it's kind of asking yourself these questions and remembering, if you don't get the answer right, that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the key, because when your brain says, hey, it's okay if I mess up here, interestingly, it calms down. And then you're probably going to make a decision from your values versus thinking, I have to make the right decision. What were those questions I'm supposed to ask myself? That actually stresses us out more. It makes it less likely that we're going to make the decision that's best for our kids.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter what decision we make, because we can always repair later.
Well, even you saying like in the moment, you're going to have that. I was circling back to this morning, and sure enough, as soon as the minute you see it, you're like, oh, I see where this is going, and it's the sitting at the breakfast table. I'm like, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
And then I instantly get right on what I call getting on the train of like projecting what this is going to mean for me 10 years from now. Like this decision is so critical of, because then, and in the world right now, I'm like, okay, how am I going to figure out how to get a COVID test in time? Because if we don't, then she won't be able to be, and then we'll be home for the whole week. And then how, and I just start in my head spiraling.
Yep.
But thankfully, I have the tools when I'm in that moment, if I'm being kind enough to see them and at least think that I allowed myself that for about 10 minutes. And then I was like, no, Megan, we know how to do this. Like, let's take a step back. So I left the room for a little bit, really was like, okay, let's just look at today. What needs to just happen today? All we need to do is navigate my two, non-negotiable things. We need to figure out where to go get a test. And that's it. Like the world is not, she's not going to be living in a van down by the river 10 years from now because of the decision I'm making right now.
Exactly. So. Right. And what's interesting is that you just described the way the brain works. When we sense a threat, we do go into this future thinking, and all of our kids do end up in a van by the river or on a couch when they're 30 watching video games and eating pizza. Like all our kids end up there. So like,
which is funny because I did actually live in a van by a river one summer, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, we need to have that.
That turned out okay.
But that is what our brains do, is that as soon as we sense a threat, we project and fix all the problems in the future. And what I always say is that projection takes us out of the place where we can figure out what they need in the moment.
Yes.
So what we need to do, and this is what I teach all the parents I work with, is learn how to reduce the threat. You did that. Here's how you did that. When we remove ourselves from a situation when possible, our brain stops seeing the threat right in front of us. And then you start to bring yourself back to the present. That's another way to reduce the threat. What is in my control right now? What can I do? You basically said to your brain, we're not going to focus on the threat. We're going to focus on what we can do, what is possible, what action I can take. That reduces your fight or flight response. And then you actually make decisions that are aligned with your values and what works best. So that's exactly what you want to do. I always say, if you want to make better decisions, reduce the threat. That's our goal, reduce the threat. And when you're raising a child with big emotions, we have to learn how to reduce the threat of their big emotions, which is a lot of what I teach.
And it's so hard because it's, as a parent, we take it on. My mom would always use this phrase with me when I was younger, which I loved. When I would be, and particularly as a new mom, she would say, remember, she would give the analogy of you're standing on the side of the road and it's a rainy day and there's big mud puddles. And if a truck comes driving by and hits the mud puddle and splashes you with all the mud, she's like, do you in the moment go, oh my gosh, this is my mud? Of course not. You just go take a shower, right? And it's gone. And so she would always use that, don't let it become your mud. Don't let that external thing thrown on you now own it, become part of it, and internalize it and wear it forever, right? Just go rinse it off. And
That's
let it
so
go.
true. And again, that's the way the brain works. If your brain internalizes that mud as yours, threat,
Which
threat,
mine
all these
does.
alarms going off. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas if you say, I can take this mud off, I can do what I can do, then your brain doesn't see a threat. It's really whether your fight or flight response is triggered or not determines how you will act, how you will feel, what you will do, and whether things are going to go well. Yeah.
It's interesting. I'd never known that correlation with that being your fight or flight response,
Exactly.
because mine is pretty darn high.
Yeah. Yeah. And so are humans with big emotions. That's where kids are too. Their fight or flight response is extremely sensitive. And this is important to hear. Our fight or flight response, one of the things it does is it shuts off that access to the part of the brain that makes good decisions.
Yeah, we're not rational.
We're not rational. We are not. And we're not good. We can't align with our values. We can't make decisions that are going to help our kids. So we have to, as much as we can, stay out of our fight or flight response. And then we have to teach our kids to do that too, by reducing the threat ahead of time so we don't see the mud as a threat necessarily, or by teaching us how to calm our brains down once we're in fight or flight. Absolutely.
Oh, so smart. And I think that, I just had a connection as well of, I always tell people whenever they're sitting down to do their plan for the week, like, don't do it at a time where you're stressed out or exhausted or whatever. And I'm
Right.
now seeing the dots. Like, I knew intrinsically that was not good, but I didn't have the science behind it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, if you're in that tense fight or flight mode of lots of things and you go to try and plan out your week, you can't bring rational thought to it.
Correct.
And everything looks hard and everything looks overwhelming.
That's correct.
And so I know for me, and I tell people that just because I do Sunday doesn't mean you have to do Sunday. It's wherever you have that. But usually by Sunday afternoon, I'm at a pretty even, content place. And so it's very easy for me to sit down, even if I'm looking at a potentially challenging week ahead.
Yes.
I can bring rational thought processes
Yes.
to figuring out how it's going to happen.
Because,
But
yeah,
not when I'm in that state, I can't.
You can't, because our primary goal as humans is to survive. So we
Mhm.
are primed to listen to our fight or flight response above our rational thinking. So if there's ever any threat in our brain, that's what our brain focuses on, versus, when we're calm, we can say, okay, now I can move beyond the threat. How can I plan my week? What's the best way for me to do this? But
Yeah.
when there's a threat in our brain, we can't focus on that. Our brains are not wired to do that. So it's absolutely great advice that you give, because you won't be able to make the same decisions when you're.
Well, I love that now I have some of the science behind it. So I can sound even more like,
Oh, you already
I know
sound like
why
that.
it works.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh God, I always just I feel guilty whenever I ask you to come on, because I feel like I get a personal therapy session with you every time. But I know everybody gets so much value out of just the thing I appreciate about everything that you share is it's real, it's honest. You are a parent going through all of this with us as well. So you bring a lot of the humanity and realism to all of the amazing education, knowledge, science, all of that you have. So I think what you're doing is a real gift for so many parents. For those people that may also have children with big emotions who feel all the feels, where is the best way for people to get connected with you these days? I love your podcast, so I will shout that one out too. But where is kind of the best place for everybody to find you?
So my podcast is probably the place to get introduced most to my material. My podcast is called Your Parenting Long Game. And the first 100 episodes are on all types of kids. And then now I'm starting to focus on children with big emotions. But I'm also on Instagram as Rachel Bailey Parenting. And then, my website is rachel-bailey.com. I'm also going to create something free for your audience. It's going to be at rachel-bailey.com/harmony.
Oh, wonderful.
To talk a little bit more about this big emotion and why what we tend to do might not support our kids as well as what we could be doing. So I'll be sending that to you as well.
Okay, awesome. And I will put all of that in the show notes as well. So if you're listening right on the website, you'll see it there. If you're listening through iTunes or ever, sometimes you just need to click on that more button as you're listening to the podcast to see all of that. So definitely go make sure that you grab that. And Rachel, thank you again for your time. It is just so greatly appreciated.
Thank you for having me here. I'm always happy to be here.